Hi there. Welcome to Mother B Reads. I'm so glad to have you back with us for another read today. Um, if this is your first time here, thank you for finding us. And if you have shared us with even one person this week, thank you especially for that. I'm so excited to get right into today's book because it is a really important story about a singer who found her voice and went on to sing on stages all across the world. This is Harlem's Little Blackbird, written by Renee Watson and illustrated by Christian Robinson. Here we go. They called her Harlem's Little Blackbird. Her name was Florence Mills. She was born in 1896 and lived in a teeny tiny itsy bitsy house in Washington, D.C. A house so fragile it would shake whenever a thunderstorm came. Mother said, "Don't fear," and she would sway back and forth to the rain's rhythm, singing the same spirituals that had carried her family through slavery's storms. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. Mother's voice wrapped Florence like a warm blanket. Florence started singing too. The louder the thunder roared, the stronger she sang. Soon the storm faded to a damp drizzle, and then the drizzle disappeared. Her voice had chased the storm away. Florence thought, if my voice is powerful enough to stop the rain, what else can it do? It wasn't long before Florence found out. On the playground at school, she would sing and dance. Her friends would stop playing just to listen. Whenever music would play, Florence's hands got to waving, her hips got to shaking, and her feet strutted and glided across the pavement. The cakewalk is what they called it. Everyone was cakewalking, but Florence did it best. Her feet were like wings fluttering in the air. Soon, Florence was cakewalking and singing in contests all over town. She won many medals. Florence had a hard time paying attention in school. Instead of listening to the teacher, she would stare out the window. The sky became her stage, and she was a star singing and dancing for the world. But wishing couldn't change the fact that she was just Florence Mills, the daughter of former slaves, living in a teeny tiny itsy bitsy house. Word danced around Washington about the little girl with big talent. Florence was invited to perform at a fancy theater. The night before the show, she practiced her routine over and over. On the day of the show, when Florence and her friends arrived at the theater, nothing was what Florence had dreamed it would be. "They can't come in," the manager said. He pointed to the sign that read, "Whites Only." "No Negroes in the audience." Florence used her voice to stand up for what was right. "If they can't go in there, I'm staying out here," Florence said, and with her hands on her hips and her head held high, she walked away. "Wait!" the manager yelled, but Florence kept walking. He begged her to perform and snuck her friends in to see the show. That night, Florence performed her best routine. Everyone stood and clapped. Less than 6 years later, her family moved to New York City. Florence and her sisters became a singing and dancing trio, the Mills Sisters. They performed at Harlem's Lincoln Theater. In the summer, the Mills sisters spent their days at Coney Island. Florence never got tired of going on the rides and playing games at the arcades. But nothing was as fun as performing at the Surf Avenue Opera House. Reporters followed them everywhere, and there was one sister they adored the most. 16-year-old Florence. "Come, hear the woman who sings like a bird. When she dances, it's as if she's flying." And she was. She flew from stage to stage all over the country, from the East Coast to the West Coast, until she landed at New York's 63rd Street Music Hall. It was 1921, and Florence won a role in Shuffle Along. The sold-out show introduced jazz to white audiences. Each night, Florence gave her best. Every part of her body danced. Her eyelashes fluttered, her fingers wiggled. She whirled around and boogied down. Night after night, she gave the audience a hand-clapping, foot-stomping good time. A very special thing was happening in Harlem, the Harlem Renaissance. All kinds of creative minds contributed to Harlem's cultural movement. Langston Hughes penned poetry, Duke Ellington composed jazz classics, and in play after play, Florence continued to mesmerize crowds. In From Dover Street to Dixie, she was so good, the cast was invited to London. Florence was excited to travel overseas. But not everyone welcomed her. When she boarded the ship, the white passengers refused to eat in the same dining room as Florence and her troupe. When she arrived in London, many people threatened to boycott the show because they didn't want to see black performers on their stage. On opening night, Florence took a deep breath, opened her mouth, and sang one note, then another, then another. The audience was amazed. Each night when Florence stepped on stage, the audience cheered before she even opened her mouth. She was an international star. And Florence thought, if my voice can take me around the world, what else can it do? After Florence sailed back to Harlem, Mr. Ziegfeld, an important Broadway manager, offered Florence a leading role. She would have been the first black woman to star in the Ziegfeld Follies. It was every performer's dream, but she turned it down. Instead, she chose to use her voice in shows that gave unknown black singers and actors a chance to perform on stage. Florence became the leading lady in Dixie to Broadway. 100 lights shined on the marquee, flashing her name. The daughter of former slaves who grew up in a teeny tiny, itsy bitsy house had made it. Florence wanted to use her voice for more than entertainment. In the show Blackbird, she sang, "I'm a little blackbird looking for a bluebird." It became her favorite song to perform, a cry for equal rights. "Though I'm of a darker hue, I've a heart the same as you. For love I'm dying, my heart is crying. A wise old owl said, keep on trying. I'm a little blackbird looking for a bluebird too." The show was such a hit that Florence was invited to London again. This time she was welcomed by photographers and news reporters, and she was invited to many parties. After her performances, Florence disguised herself so no one would recognize her. She went to hospitals to deliver flowers to patients, and she walked along the Thames River giving money and food to beggars. Florence kept giving and dancing and singing until she was too exhausted to perform anymore. She became very ill and returned to Harlem to receive treatment from her doctor. But there was not much her doctor could do. On November 1st, 1927, Florence's song came to an end. More than 150,000 mourners flooded the streets of Harlem to say goodbye. Letters, telegrams, and flowers were sent to the family from all over the world. People who had a lot and people who had little, politicians and entertainers, whites and blacks, gave tribute to Florence Mills. Even blackbirds came. Hundreds of them were seen hovering nearby. Florence's dream lives on in the singers and dancers who came after her. It lives on in the heart of every boy and girl from a teeny tiny, itsy bitsy place who dreams of doing great, big, gigantic, enormous things. One of the best things about storytelling is that it's a fantastic way to learn about people who came before us. Actually, in this case, it is one of the only ways that we have to keep the memory and legacy of Florence Mills alive. Did you know that there are actually no recordings of Florence's voice or films of her performing around today? Hard to believe, but it's true. And there are so many other things to learn about Florence Mills. And so I have personally challenged myself to learn one other thing this week, which I will be posting to the Mother B Reads Instagram page. One other thing about Florence Mills, and it would be great, I would actually really love it if you also challenged yourself to learn one thing about Florence Mills. Maybe something that wasn't in the book, or maybe something that you would like to find out about her, and share it with me on my Instagram page this week. Wouldn't that be fun? Let's do that. So again, thank you for joining me today. I'm so glad to have had you. I hope you really enjoyed today's book. And I hope to see you on Instagram this week too. If you have not yet, like this video, subscribe to Mother B Reads, and don't forget to click on the notification bell so you don't miss any future uploads. Okay, I'll see you next week. Bye.